Fly over India today, and you will see something no satellite image could have captured just a decade ago. Cranes stretch across skylines in dozens of cities at once. New ports are rising along coastlines that once sat quiet and underused for generations. Highways cut through mountains that engineers once called impossible to conquer. This is not a single project or a single announcement. This is a nationwide transformation happening simultaneously across nearly every sector of physical infrastructure imaginable. And the most important thing to understand about this boom is something almost nobody outside India seems to fully grasp yet. This is not the peak of India's infrastructure story. This is only the beginning. Analysts who track global infrastructure spending increasingly describe India's current activity as merely the opening phase of a much longer national transformation. Construction firms operating across the country report order books filled years into the future, a signal that this momentum shows no signs of slowing. This is the story of how India's infrastructure boom reached this point, and why the next chapter may be even bigger than anything built so far. Stay until the end, because the final reason this matters explains why global investors are watching India's infrastructure story more closely than ever before. For decades, India's infrastructure lagged noticeably behind its economic ambitions, creating a persistent gap between potential and reality. Roads remained congested and poorly maintained. Ports struggled with delays that frustrated exporters and importers alike. Power grids failed to reliably reach every corner of a rapidly growing population. International investors frequently cited this infrastructure gap as the single biggest obstacle preventing India from reaching its true economic potential on the global stage. For years, ambitious infrastructure plans existed largely on paper, slowed by funding constraints, land disputes, and painfully slow bureaucratic approval processes across every level of government. Critics assumed this pattern would continue indefinitely, treating grand infrastructure announcements as little more than political promises unlikely to ever fully materialize. Similar skepticism once surrounded India's space program, its digital payment revolution, and its manufacturing ambitions, each eventually proven wrong by sustained results over time. Infrastructure felt different to many observers, given the sheer scale of investment, coordination, and time required to genuinely close such a long-standing gap. That old pattern has now been dramatically broken, replaced by a level of coordinated, sustained infrastructure investment that surprised even long-time skeptics. Behind the scenes, government planners, private companies, and international partners have aligned around a shared understanding that infrastructure determines economic destiny. And when the full scope of this ongoing transformation becomes clear, its true significance extends far beyond any single completed project or ribbon-cutting ceremony. Let us count down the 7 reasons India's infrastructure boom is only just getting started, starting from number 7. Number 7 is the sheer breadth of sectors currently being transformed simultaneously, rather than the more typical pattern of isolated individual projects. Highways, railways, ports, airports, power grids, and digital networks are all expanding at once, rather than progressing through separate, disconnected phases of development. This simultaneous approach creates powerful reinforcing effects, since improvements in one sector directly amplify the benefits generated by improvements happening in others nearby. A new highway connecting to an upgraded port multiplies the economic value of both projects far beyond what either investment could achieve entirely on its own. Government planners have increasingly adopted this integrated approach, recognizing that infrastructure investments deliver maximum impact when carefully coordinated rather than pursued independently. This shift toward integrated planning reflects lessons learned from decades of fragmented development that often failed to deliver the full economic benefits originally anticipated.
Number 6 is the unprecedented scale of private sector participation now flowing into projects once considered exclusively the responsibility of government alone. Private companies, both domestic and international, are increasingly funding and operating major infrastructure projects through structured partnerships with government agencies nationwide. This shift brings additional capital, efficiency, and technical expertise into projects that previously depended entirely on limited and often constrained government budgets.
International investment funds specifically dedicated to infrastructure have poured billions of dollars into Indian projects, drawn by improving regulatory clarity and demonstrated project execution capability. This growing confidence among private investors signals something important, since capital rarely flows this consistently toward markets perceived as unstable or unreliable. Every successful project completed on time and within budget further strengthens this growing investor confidence, creating a positive cycle that attracts even more future investment. Pension funds and sovereign wealth funds from other countries have increasingly allocated portions of their portfolios specifically toward Indian infrastructure assets, viewing them as stable, long-term investments. This kind of institutional capital rarely arrives without extensive due diligence, meaning its presence itself signals genuine confidence in India's execution capability. Fund managers overseeing these investments frequently cite India's improving track record of on-time project delivery as a decisive factor in their allocation decisions. That reputation, once non-existent, has been built patiently over years of consistent execution across dozens of major infrastructure projects nationwide. Number 5 is the deliberate focus on connecting previously underdeveloped regions rather than simply reinforcing infrastructure in already prosperous major cities. Many of India's most ambitious current projects specifically target regions that historically received minimal infrastructure investment, despite significant economic and population potential. This strategy addresses long-standing regional inequality while simultaneously unlocking new sources of economic growth in areas previously considered too remote or underdeveloped. New industrial corridors are rising in states once overlooked by major investors, drawn by improving transportation links and increasingly reliable power infrastructure. This geographic expansion of infrastructure investment suggests planners understand that India's future growth depends on developing the entire country, not merely its wealthiest existing centers. Economists tracking regional development increasingly point to this strategy as essential for sustaining India's overall economic growth over the coming decades. Families in these newly connected regions describe genuine changes in daily life, from shorter commutes to new job opportunities that simply did not exist just a few years earlier. This human dimension of infrastructure development often receives less attention than headline construction figures, yet it may ultimately matter most for measuring true success. Number 4 is the growing emphasis on renewable energy infrastructure, positioning India among global leaders in this rapidly expanding sector. Massive solar and wind power installations are being constructed across multiple states, supported by ambitious government targets for renewable energy capacity expansion. This renewable focus serves multiple purposes simultaneously, reducing dependence on imported fossil fuels while positioning India favorably within global environmental and climate commitments. International climate finance organizations have increasingly directed funding toward Indian renewable projects, recognizing both the environmental impact and genuine economic opportunity these investments represent. This energy transformation also supports India's broader manufacturing ambitions, since reliable and increasingly affordable power directly affects industrial competitiveness across nearly every sector. Global energy analysts increasingly cite India's renewable expansion as a critical factor in broader international efforts to address climate change at meaningful scale.
Manufacturing facilities for solar panels and wind turbine components are increasingly being built domestically, reducing reliance on imported equipment while creating new skilled manufacturing jobs. This localization of renewable energy manufacturing mirrors similar strategies India has pursued successfully in other sectors, from electronics to pharmaceutical production. Battery storage technology, essential for managing renewable energy's inherent variability, is also receiving domestic investment as part of this broader energy transformation strategy. This comprehensive approach to renewable infrastructure, covering generation, manufacturing, and storage simultaneously, distinguishes India's strategy from more piecemeal efforts seen in other developing economies. Number 3 is the accelerating development of India's digital infrastructure, running parallel to and reinforcing its physical infrastructure transformation. Expanding telecommunications networks, data centers, and digital payment systems are being built alongside traditional infrastructure projects, creating a comprehensive modernization across multiple dimensions simultaneously. This digital layer enhances the value of physical infrastructure investments, enabling smarter traffic management, more efficient logistics, and better coordinated public services nationwide. Smart city initiatives incorporating digital infrastructure are transforming urban centers, integrating technology into everything from traffic management to public utility service delivery. This combination of physical and digital infrastructure development represents a distinctly modern approach, differing meaningfully from how earlier infrastructure booms unfolded in other nations.
International technology companies increasingly view India's digital infrastructure investment as creating genuine competitive advantages beyond what traditional infrastructure alone could ever provide. Data centers being built across multiple states now support not just domestic digital services, but increasingly serve as regional hubs for broader international cloud computing operations. This growing digital infrastructure capacity positions India favorably within global conversations about data sovereignty and regional technology infrastructure independence. Fiber optic networks now reach districts that just years ago relied entirely on unreliable mobile signals, bringing genuine broadband access to previously underserved rural populations. This expanding digital reach supports everything from remote education to telemedicine, extending the practical benefits of infrastructure investment well beyond simple economic metrics alone. Number 2 is the sustained political commitment underlying this infrastructure boom, extending consistently across multiple budget cycles and changing economic conditions. Unlike previous infrastructure initiatives that often lost momentum after initial announcements, current projects have maintained consistent funding and policy support over an extended period. This sustained commitment provides the kind of long-term certainty that private investors and international partners require before committing substantial capital to major projects. Government officials have increasingly treated infrastructure development as a core national priority rather than simply one policy area among many competing for limited attention. This political consistency matters enormously since infrastructure projects typically require many years to complete, making sustained commitment essential for eventual success. International observers increasingly note this consistency as a key factor distinguishing India's current infrastructure boom from previous less successful attempts at similar transformation. Opposition political parties, while disagreeing sharply on many policy matters, have generally maintained broad support for continued infrastructure investment regardless of which party holds power. This rare cross-party consensus provides an additional layer of stability that further reassures long-term investors evaluating India's infrastructure sector. Number 1, and the reason this boom is genuinely just getting started, is the sheer scale of projects still in early planning and development stages. Current, completed, and ongoing projects represent only a fraction of what government planners have outlined in longer-term national infrastructure development strategies. Additional highway corridors, railway expansions, port developments, and renewable energy installations are already planned for construction across the coming decade and beyond. This pipeline of future projects suggests the current visible transformation represents merely an early chapter in a much longer, more ambitious national development story. Global investors tracking India's infrastructure sector increasingly view this extended pipeline as evidence that current growth rates are likely to continue for years to come. This forward-looking perspective transforms how the world should understand India's infrastructure boom, not as a temporary surge, but as a sustained, long-term national transformation. Government 5-year plans and longer-term strategic documents outline hundreds of additional projects, many still awaiting final approval or early-stage construction work. Even conservative estimates suggest current infrastructure spending levels will need to continue for at least another decade simply to complete already announced initiatives. Some planning documents extend projections even further, outlining infrastructure ambitions stretching well into the middle of the century as India's population and economy continue growing. This extended timeline suggests today's impressive infrastructure achievements may eventually be remembered as merely early chapters in a much longer national development story. The world spent decades viewing India's infrastructure primarily through the lens of persistent gaps and unmet potential rather than genuine achievement. That perception is changing rapidly as completed projects demonstrate India's genuine capability to execute ambitious infrastructure development at truly massive scale. This transformation did not happen through a single dramatic announcement or one impressive unveiling ceremony attended by global media and dignitaries. It happened through years of patient investment, difficult institutional reforms, and a steady national commitment to infrastructure many once considered permanently out of reach. Other nations built infrastructure booms during specific historical windows, often followed by decades of comparatively slower, more incremental development afterward. India appears to be building something different, a sustained, ongoing transformation rather than a single concentrated burst of construction activity. That distinction matters enormously for how the rest of the world should think about India's economic trajectory over the coming years and decades.
A nation still early in its infrastructure development curve, rather than approaching its ceiling, represents a fundamentally different kind of investment opportunity and strategic partner. This is not simply a story about roads, ports, or power plants documented in glossy government reports and promotional materials. This is a story about a nation recognizing that sustained infrastructure investment determines long-term economic competitiveness in ways too easily overlooked or underestimated. Every new highway, every expanded port, and every renewable energy installation represents another quiet step toward a genuinely transformed national economic foundation. And as these individual projects connect into a larger, more coherent national infrastructure network, their combined significance grows far beyond what any single project could achieve alone. The cranes are still rising. The projects already completed represent only a fraction of what current national development plans envision for the coming decade and beyond. The investment is still flowing as both domestic and international capital continues recognizing the genuine opportunity this ongoing transformation represents. Every completed bridge, every operational port, and every newly connected village adds another data point to a growing body of evidence supporting continued investment. Skilled workers trained on today's projects will carry that expertise forward into tomorrow's, building institutional knowledge that compounds with each successive undertaking. The world spent decades assuming India's infrastructure gap would remain a permanent obstacle, limiting the country's broader economic ambitions and global competitiveness. That assumption no longer tells the complete story. The only question left now is how much further this transformation will extend before the rest of the world fully recognizes its true scale and significance. For a nation once defined by infrastructure limitations, that quiet recognition alone would mark one of the great economic turning points of this era. Consider the sheer physical evidence scattered across the country today, evidence that speaks louder than any government report or promotional statistic ever could. Ports, once clogged with delays, now process cargo in a fraction of the time they once required, moving goods to market faster than ever before.
Rural villages, once cut off during monsoon season, now maintain year-round connectivity, opening access to healthcare, education, and economic opportunity previously out of reach. Cities, once struggling with unreliable power, now support growing industries that depend on consistent electricity to operate factories and serve customers reliably. None of these individual improvements alone would constitute a dramatic transformation, but together they represent something genuinely historic in scale and ambition. This is what a nation looks like when it decides deliberately and consistently that infrastructure investment today determines economic possibility for generations to come. The boom continues, quietly, steadily, and without any clear sign of slowing down any time in the foreseeable future. Analysts who once questioned whether India could sustain this pace now increasingly ask a different question entirely, wondering just how much larger this transformation might eventually become. That shift in the underlying question, from doubt about capability to curiosity about ultimate scale, may itself be the clearest sign of how far this story has already traveled. Think back to where this story began, with a nation once known mainly for congested roads, unreliable power, and infrastructure that consistently fell short of its economic ambitions. That starting point now feels almost unrecognizable when measured against the scale of activity currently underway across nearly every region of the country. Engineers who once struggled to secure funding for modest upgrades to existing systems now oversee projects of an astronomical scale.